I didn't set out to believe in a world beneath this one. I want to be clear about that before we begin, because the moment you say the words inner Earth out loud, people stop listening. They file you away. So let me be precise about what I'm not saying. I'm not telling you there are lizard kings ruling a crystal kingdom under your feet. I'm not telling you to dig. I'm telling you something narrower and I think much harder to dismiss. I'm telling you that when you line up the myths, the maps, the expeditions, the gaps in what we're allowed to explore, and the things that supposedly don't exist, a shape emerges. And once you see that shape, you can't unsee it. Start with a simple exercise. Don't take my word for anything. Open a map of the deepest places humans have ever physically reached inside the planet. The deepest mine, the deepest borehole, the deepest cave system mapped to its terminus. Now compare those depths to the radius of the Earth, roughly 6,371 kilometers from surface to center. The deepest hole humanity has ever drilled, the Kola super-deep borehole in Russia, reached about 12 kilometers before it stopped. 12 out of 6,300. We have, in the most literal sense, scratched the surface. We have walked on the moon. We have landed machines on Mars. And we have penetrated our own planet to a depth of less than 0.2%. So here is the question that started all of this for me. How do we know what's down there? The official answer is seismology. We don't go down, we listen. We measure how earthquake waves travel through the planet, and we infer the layers from how those waves bend and slow and disappear. Crust, mantle, outer core, inner core. A neat diagram in every textbook, the same one you drew in school, an apple sliced open. And I believed it too, for a long time. But the deeper I went, the more I found that this picture isn't a photograph, it's a reconstruction, an interpretation of indirect signals. And interpretations, as we've learned again and again, can be shaped by what the interpreter already expects to find. So let's listen more carefully. Because there's something inside the seismic data that the textbook diagram smooths over. When seismologists trace earthquake waves through the deep earth, they find shadow zones, regions where the waves arrive distorted, delayed, or don't arrive at all. The official explanation tells us this is simply the boundary between the solid mantle and the liquid outer core, the waves refracting like light through water. A clean answer. But here's what troubles me. The model has been revised, and revised, and revised again. The inner core, we were told, was solid iron. Then it was spinning at a different rate than the surface. Then it was slowing down. Then, in recent years, researchers proposed an innermost inner core, a core within the core, a structure nobody predicted, discovered only because the old model kept failing to explain the data. This raises a simple but critical question. If the picture of the deep earth is stable, settled science, why does it keep changing every time we listen harder? And what else is the data telling us that doesn't fit the apple slice diagram and so gets quietly filed away? Now leave the seismographs and go to the oldest evidence we have, the myths. Because myths are not lies. Myths are memory, compressed and carried across generations by people who had no reason to coordinate their stories. And when you lay the world's myths side by side, you find something that should not be possible. The Tibetans speak of Agartha, a kingdom in the hollow of the world, ruled from a subterranean capital, accessible through hidden passages in the Himalayas. The same tradition speaks of Shambhala, a hidden land of the wise. Travel west and the Greeks give us Hades and the vast organized underworld beneath the surface, not a metaphor for death, but a place, with rivers and regions and gates. The Norse described Svartalfheim, the realm of beings who dwelled below. The Sumerians, oldest of the literate civilizations, wrote of the Kur, the underworld beneath the earth. Cross the ocean entirely, and the Hopi describe emerging into this world from below, through an opening they call the Sipapu, and they describe ancestors who chose to remain in the world beneath. The Pueblo peoples tell the same emergent story. The Mayans spoke of Xibalba, an underworld reached through caves with its own cities and its own lords. Different continents, different millennia. Cultures that, by the official account, had no contact with one another. And every single one of them independently arrives at the same architecture. An organized, inhabited world beneath the surface, reached through hidden openings, governed by beings who chose to remain below. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. We are told this is coincidence, that all humans fear the dark, and so all humans invented an underworld. But that explanation requires us to believe that dozens of isolated civilizations, with completely different gods, different cosmologies, different fears, all happen to invent not a vague darkness, but a specific recurring structure. Cities, rulers, entrances, and a deliberate separation from the surface world. Does that sound like parallel coincidence to you? Or does it sound like memory of something real, fractured and carried in different directions? Now let's talk about the poles, because this is where the modern story begins, and where the silence becomes deafening. Look at maps of the world from earlier centuries, the same period when so many other things were being redrawn. On a number of them, you'll find the polar regions depicted not as solid ice caps, but with curious features at the very top and bottom, openings, channels, a strange uncertainty exactly where the cartographers should have been most confident if the answer were simply ice. The official explanation is that nobody had been there yet, that these were guesses, decorative flourishes filling unknown space. Fair enough. But then explorers did go, and the records of what they reported are stranger than the maps. Consider the expeditions to Antarctica in the mid-20th century. In 1946 and 1947, the United States launched Operation High Jump, an enormous naval expedition to the Antarctic. Thousands of personnel, ships, aircraft. The official purpose was training and territorial survey. But here is what troubles me. An operation planned for months was cut short and withdrawn early. And the deeper I looked, the more I found references to the expedition's commanding officer making unusual public statements afterward about the strategic importance of the poles and about aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole. Statements that get quoted in fragments, and then, when you try to trace them to their full original context, the trail goes cold. Not everywhere, just at the critical points, just where the meaning would become clear. And then there is the diary, the alleged private diary attributed to a famous polar aviator, describing a flight beyond the pole into a warm green interior, a land that should not exist past the ice. Now, I am not going to stand here and tell you that diary is authentic. The official position is that it's a forgery, a hoax, and they may be right. But ask yourself why a hoax about this particular subject took root so deeply, and why the question of what lies beyond the poles generates so much more institutional discomfort than a simple, "There's nothing there, here are the photographs," would require. When the answer is genuinely nothing, you don't need to keep insisting. The insistence is itself a kind of evidence. If you're finding value in this investigation, I'd encourage you to look at the polar flight records yourself. The evidence is hiding in plain sight, in the gaps between what was planned and what was reported. Now go underground in the literal sense. The cave systems. We like to imagine we've mapped our planet, but the truth is that the subterranean world is one of the least explored environments on Earth, more unknown to us than the surface of the moon. Cavers have descended into systems like Veryovkina and Krubera in the Caucasus, more than 2 kilometers straight down, and they did not reach a bottom because the explorable passages simply continued beyond where humans could safely follow. The official framing is that these are isolated geological features, water carving limestone over millions of years, nothing more. But here's the strangest part. Cave systems are not isolated. They connect. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky alone has over 600 kilometers of mapped passages, and surveyors freely admit they have not found its limits. Across the world, vast networks run beneath mountains and continents, and we have explored only the fraction a human body can crawl into and crawl back out of. So I want to ask the question the official account skips. If we have only mapped the passages narrow enough and shallow enough for a person to survive, what is in the passages we cannot reach? We assume empty rock. But that's an assumption built on convenience, not on observation. We have never seen it. We have simply decided what must be there. And it's not only the caves, it's the entrances that recur in the records with the same unsettling consistency as the myths. Mount Shasta in California, where for over a century there have been persistent accounts of a hidden settlement within or beneath the mountain, of figures seen and then never explained, of an old tradition of a refuge city, restricted regions in the Himalayas where access is controlled and certain valleys remain effectively closed, locations in the Amazon, in Tibet, in the high Andes, where local populations maintain calmly and consistently that there are ways into the earth that outsiders are not shown. The official explanation treats each of these as a separate local legend, a regional curiosity. But look at them together. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. The same kind of place, the same kind of guardianship, the same refusal across cultures that never met to treat the entrance as a story rather than a fact. Here is what bothers me most. When empires fall, we get records. When civilizations end, they leave ruins, refugees, transition documents, the long-recorded mess of collapse. But the underground civilizations of the world's myths leave a different signature entirely. They don't fall, they withdraw. In nearly every tradition, the beings below didn't die out. They chose to descend, to seal the passages, to separate themselves from the surface world deliberately. And that detail, repeated across continents, is the one that the primitive fear of the dark explanation cannot touch. You do not invent independently on 5 continents the specific idea of an advanced people who looked at the surface world and decided to leave it behind. That is not a fear. That is a memory of a decision. So why don't we simply go and check? We have ground-penetrating radar. We have satellite gravimetry that can detect mass anomalies deep below the surface. We have the technology, for the first time in history, to map what lies beneath us without digging. So why hasn't there been a comprehensive, public, transparent mapping of the deep interior, the same way we've mapped the ocean floor and the surface of Mars? Some surveys exist, certainly, targeted ones, classified ones, but never a complete open atlas of what is beneath our feet. Why not? We are a species obsessed with exploration, with planting flags, with knowing. Unless there is something the knowing would reveal. Unless the answer to what's down there is an answer that doesn't fit the diagram in the textbook, and so the question is simply never funded, never prioritized, never asked too loudly. The official explanation collapses here. We're told the deep earth is unreachable, too hot, too dense, too dangerous, and so our ignorance is simply physics. But that explanation requires us to believe that a civilization capable of landing rovers on other planets and listening to gravitational waves from colliding black holes a billion light-years away is helpless before the ground it stands on. That the same ingenuity that crossed the solar system cannot, in principle, be turned downward. I don't think we're helpless. I think the downward gaze is, somewhere, discouraged. I've shown you a model of the deep earth that keeps changing every time we listen harder. Myths of subterranean cities that converge across continents that never met. Polar expeditions that were cut short and statements that vanish when you trace them. Cave systems we admit we cannot map to their end. Entrances guarded by the same kind of silence in a dozen unconnected cultures. And a strange, total institutional disinterest in actually looking. What does it all mean? maybe nothing. Maybe I am doing exactly what the skeptics say, seeing faces in clouds, connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. Maybe the underworld myths are just the universal human fear of the dark wearing different costumes. Maybe the seismic model is right and will simply keep refining itself the way good science does. Maybe the deep earth is solid rock and molten iron all the way down, exactly as we were taught, and there is no hidden world, no Agartha, no withdrawn people, no sealed door in the side of a mountain. But what if it isn't nothing? What if the myths are not metaphors but testimony, the oldest testimony we have, carried by the only people who were there? What if the reason every map of the planet's interior is a reconstruction rather than a photograph is that no one has ever been permitted to take the photograph? What if there is a world beneath this one, organized, ancient, deliberately hidden, and the reason it sounds insane to say so is precisely that we have been so thoroughly taught not to ask? I don't have answers. I have a borehole that stopped at 12 kilometers and a textbook that pretends to know the other 6,300. I have myths that agree with each other across oceans they could not cross. I have expeditions that came home early and explorers whose words evaporate when you reach for them. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you stand on solid ground, ask yourself how you actually know what is beneath it. Not what you were told, what you can prove. The next time someone shows you the apple slice diagram of the Earth, ask them who took the picture. And the next time someone tells you the underground cities are only a legend, ask yourself why so many people who never met each other remembered the same hidden world, the same sealed door, the same people who looked at the surface and chose to go below. Maybe they were all imagining it. Or maybe what we call legend is just the memory the surface world agreed to forget. And somewhere beneath the maps we trust and the science we never tested, the door is still there, still closed, still waiting for someone to stop pretending it doesn't exist. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it.